Hey folks, today I'm going to try and go through the patch notes very quickly. They are very large, so I will move fast. This is from the perspective of somebody who played a lot of Mage and COF in Cycle 1, so I'll try to provide my expertise where I can, and where not, I'll try and skim over as quickly as I can. So, kicking it off, we have the Cycle 1.1. There's some information about the new stuff. This is about stashes with Legacy. This has already been talked about, so I won't go into it too much. Evade, this has already been covered in the previous quality of life posts and others, so I won't go into that too much. So we have the new Pinnacle boss. You have to slay the Harbingers to gain the ability to challenge the boss. As you defeat the Monolith bosses, you get the eyes, you fight the Harbinger, and so on. As you fight the Harbinger, you need to fight again at increasingly higher corruption levels. So that's important to note that you won't be able to just do it on super easy difficulty over and over and then challenge the boss, the pinnacle, over and over. You have to ramp the difficulty. Makes sense. It also important to note here is the alt characters you can immediately unlock empowered by doing one of the final timelines. So there is some potential for taxi there that's pretty cool. You do the one timeline, you kill the Harbinger, and then you go to empowered. So if you have a well-leveled, well-geared alt character, you can just blaze through. Great stuff. So we have the Forgotten Knights faction, the new faction. We have here the ranks, pretty cool stuff. Plus 40% chance for Nemesis items to include the egg. Cool. 10% chance for double stability gain. This is pretty small. It equates to 10% more stability. I guess it's a pretty nice perk to just generally have. Double Harbinger needle drop chances is good. That is the idol that you put in your idol slot. It breaks, you get extra Gaze of OROBYSS for pushing corruption. Cool stuff. Plus 6 forging potential from empowering a nemesis. This is pretty good. So if you're putting your items in there, you get that. Or when you do the empower, you get better items. We have the Glyph of Envy. We've already talked about what that is in the previous post on quality of life, so go check that out. Tiers of sealed affixes, 15% higher on average. This is a pretty big buff, so if you don't know, it can add sealed affixes, and they can be up to tier 7. So other than the Glyph Rune of Research, you haven't been able to get Exalted sealed. With this, you now can on normal affixes, so that's really cool. And we also have +1 corruption gain on Gaze, so you go from, I believe it was 12 to now 13, and then you also gain 1 additional stack when you slay the Harbinger, so you'll be getting a lot of Gaze stacks that also give more corruption. Blessing values, roll twice, pick the highest roll. This will make getting your blessings of the roll you want significantly easier, and with the new blessing swap we'll talk about in a second, that'll make a big difference of getting your blessings maxed out. We also have double chance for Harbingers to drop their specific uniques. This should stack with the COF bonuses. I'm hoping it should be multiplicative. This is pretty cool stuff. And we have a new zone for the faction. There's some stuff here on party play. I won't touch on that too much. We also have Nemesis. We've talked about this already, so I'll skim over it. There's some information here about the egg. This seems to be new. The chance of the egg appearing scales from 0%, then 20%, then 60% at level 100. And then it also has plus 40% chance with the rank 1. I'm thinking this is additive, so maybe this would be 40%, 60%, 100%? Maybe. I'm not 100% sure if this is additive or multiplicative, but that would be cool. Anyway. Some more information on party play, how it works with Nemesis. We have upgradable Nemesis weapons. I'm guessing these count as uniques, but I'm not entirely certain. Maybe they are base types that have their own roles. Not exactly sure, but you kill the Harbinger with them, they upgrade, and you get a new, more powerful weapon. It says for every weapon and offhand type. Really cool. Hopefully these are good. I'm excited for that. And we also have keybinds will be reset, not a big deal. Boss ward, we've already talked about this. The significant bosses will have more breakpoints. You can see here when you get to the breakpoint, gives it a bunch of ward. That is how they are replacing the boss DR mechanic. So now bosses will take the full damage, but they will get this decaying ward bar that decays quicker over time. So basically, it's trying to make the boss defense more intuitive than the existing system, where it's a very kind of obscure DR thing that you don't exactly know what's going on. Anyway, so we have bosses have more health against stun and freeze. Boss health against stun and freeze are now taking ward into account. This makes sense. So it will be harder to stun lock bosses, but still possible in theory. We have the ward decay formula is changed here. We've already talked about this, but basically it's now squared instead of linear. And from that, it starts at a bit of a lower point. So the break-even point is 4,000. Below 4,000 ward, you decay slower. Above 4,000, you now decay faster. You can see how quickly this scales. For high levels of ward, you will decay extremely quickly. So this might make it hard unless there's some extreme abuse mechanic that just gives you an absurd amount. You can still muscle your way through this potentially, but it will reduce those ward abusers a lot. We also have Glyph of Envy. We've already talked about this. Pretty cool. We have experience changes. So this also affects COF heavily because experience is how you get favor. For those of you who don't know, 750 experience gives you 1 favor. So anything that changes experience will change your ability to get prophecies for COF. So anyway, we now have XP requirements increasing pretty significantly. So I think in total, I could be remembering correctly, it's something like 300 and something million experience to get to level 100, I believe. So this should increase it probably 500-600 million. I haven't done the math. Just off the top of my head, this is a lot. 60% increase on 100, I think is like 80 million or something experience. So that is a pretty big change. XP from XP tomes now scale up less above level 60. This is a huge nerf. I guess we don't know exactly how much it scales less. But anyway, XP tome rewards from echoes further from the center now contain more XP tomes up to a maximum of 7 from all previously granting 3. This could be a big buff overall to XP tomes. It's not exactly clear, but it will probably change how you play the game. If you're looking to prioritize XP tomes, maybe you stay at the outer edge of the web, which is a little bit detrimental because if you're trying to also push corruption or kill shade for the loot that it drops, you won't be able to do that reliably. So I'm not exactly sure whether this ends up being a buff or a nerf. It also says the occurrence rate is reduced. This is a huge nerf to COF in general at low corruption. This is how you get your favor, is the XP tomes. With this being nerfed, you're going to get a lot less favor. Hopefully that is balanced out by some of the other stuff, but I don't know. We have some minimum skill level changes. Cool, this is a buff to the minimum skill level. Rounded, reduce experience scaling from corruption. So this is a massive nerf to endgame COF, probably the biggest one that we've seen. So the corruption scaling is, the experience bonus increases at a 25% speed after 300. So every 100 corruption above 300 is now 25 corruption as far as experience. So that is a huge, huge nerf. And then now it's 5. You get 5% of the added experience above 1,000. That is actually quite a lot. So for farming favor, going above 1,000 corruption is pretty much meaningless now. There's no point in doing it. So if you do want to farm favor, chances are you're probably going to stop at 1,000 and then farm as quickly as possible if you have a very strong build, or you're probably going to stop around 300, 400, something like that if your build is not quite as strong, and then just focus on absolute maximum clear speed, clearing as quickly as possible. That might end up getting you more favor now, and then it'll also mean you get more of the XP tomes, which might make up a larger percentage of the total favor that you get. So we will have to see what the strategy ends up being, but it will be much different than 1.0, so stay tuned. I will be making content on that once we have more information. Yeah, intended to avoid very high corruption, feeling necessary, so they nerf it. Makes sense. What else we have? Some gameplay. You can now equip two-handed weapon while dual wielding. I really like this. Before you had to unequip one of them and then equip the two-handed, so now you can do weapon swaps much more quickly. So like the last laugh with the execute tech, if you're doing that, You swap in, you get a 25% execute. This is easier to do mechanically. Pretty cool stuff. Reduced item sell costs. This is to disincentivize people from picking items up and selling them to the vendor. You're not supposed to do that in last epoch. Makes sense. What else? Added extra waypoint. If you die, you have checkpoints for Lagon and so on. This is good. Loot filter improvements. We've already talked about this, but basically you have LP filters now. That's the big thing. You can have multiple affix convictions. That's another big thing. This is really, really nice. Huge buff to loot filters. What else? We have some control stuff here. We have some UI stuff here. What do we have? New pages to the game guide. Looks good. What else? Character stat. We have more stats for each category. This is really, really good. Something people have been asking for. You're going to have more details on your character in the stat sheet. I like that a lot. We have localization, some more language stuff here. Cool. What else? We have some MTX potion drop changes. They're changing some of the logic around the distance for potions. Cool. But people who play potion builds, they'll probably understand more of if this is relevant. Okay, so we have the search for Monolith. We've already talked about this. There are some changes. Obviously, because they've reduced the amount of XP tomes, they're increasing some of the other rewards. It's unclear whether or not this is good. They've also, this is a really big one, reduced the gold scaling from corruption above 500. Increase gold drops globally, so they've reduced the disparity between high corruption and low corruption, less incentive. Pretty much overall, there's less incentive to do high corruption, and that seems to be the direction they're taking. I still think the LP scaling, as far as I know, is unchanged, but it is already having diminishing returns. So maybe pushing extremely high corruption is no longer necessary. I guess we'll see. So they've done some stuff to make the monster density feel more consistent. Really cool. What else? We have the gauge of OROBYSS. You now gain 12 corruption, so this is a buff. You can only gain 4 per. This is actually okay. I don't think that this is a problem. You'll be able to stack a lot of them up really quickly, and then you can go and dump them all fighting shades. I think this is fine because they used to diminish pretty heavily before. Now they don't, and you only lose 1 when you die. I think this will make pushing corruption feel a lot smoother and less like all or nothing punishing. So it's really cool. Guess also gain OROBYSS when they're offered a blessing and empowered. Okay, makes sense. So we have the blessing swap. We've already talked about this in the quality of life. Check that out for more details. Ladder, we've already talked about this. Item factions. So general changes. This is a really, really big one. We've already talked about it, but I'll mention again. The scaling of favor is 5% per rank, so you get up to 60% increased favor. This will balance out with the corruption scaling being reduced. There will be a break-even point. I haven't done the math yet, but we will be able to do the math. So at some number of corruption, the favor gain will be the same as 1.0. I'm guessing it's probably like, I don't know, 700, 800 or something like that. I need to do the math, but yeah, so there will be extra favor initially. This is good. So for most of you, that will mean you probably end up gaining rank 12 quicker. If you don't know, reputation is based on favor gain, but I'm not sure if this is also indirectly scaling the reputation gain. If it is, you will rank up much faster. If it's not, you'll still rank up a little bit faster because they've reduced the amount of experience needed. So pretty cool. There's 2 new ranks for each faction. Merchant Guild, they've spread it out so that you can get more checkpoints of useful things to buy. This should be a quality of life improvement for Merchant Guild. For COF, I've already talked about the improvements, but there are some pain points that have been addressed, such as experimental items here. You drop twice as many. The dupe items from prophecies is now twice as many, so you get individual rolls. This is actually a good thing. I've explained this before. I won't go into it again, but this is a buff. And we also have the bosses have drop rate for any of their specific rewards. This should stack with all of the other boss drop rate stuff that we're getting. So this is really cool. Big changes for COF. I like it. Then we have some skill changes, channeled skills. So you can now scale mana regen with channeled skills. Previously, you didn't regen mana. This adds a lot of build potential, different things you can do with mana. Really cool stuff. I do think that there might be some weird interactions that haven't been thought of. This is a huge change. There's a lot of channeled skills in the game, and there's a lot of weird stuff you can do with mana, so I'm sure people will come up with crazy stuff. Definitely let me know in the comments if you have any ideas of cool stuff you could do with this change. Ailments, so Frostbite is buffed. Blind, I think Blind is now completely useless. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but it says no longer causes enemies to aim erratically. This was one of the main reasons you take it. It now makes enemies unable to critically strike from having critical strike chance. So I think the idea behind this is it's supposed to make it so you don't need crit avoidance or crit damage reduction, but it doesn't actually achieve this because some enemies you won't be able to apply the blind to before they hit you. Some things will off-screen you, they'll still crit. I'm thinking that the spires can also crit. I'm pretty sure they can, and you probably won't be applying blind to them while they're hitting you. So I don't think this is a good change. I think blind is dead, but I don't know. Anyway, withering. This is a nerf that bleeds. Respecting ailment conversion. Okay. This is interesting stuff here. The frenzy, haste, whatever can no longer be replaced by stacks with lower mint. This is a huge buff. This is a bug fix. I love it. Attempting to replace a long duration with a lower duration will still trigger. Okay, cool. Bug fix. Several cases where self-inflicted ailments were not respecting ailment conversions. I think that this means the Immolator's belt might be buffed. I think you can bleed yourself and convert it to ignite and then do crazy damage. I'm really interested to see how this turns out, but this might actually be a build enabling bug fix right here. What else? We have some skill buffering things, some random bug fixes. Bone Prism. This looks like a nerf. It was very overpowered. It was used for the Profane Veil thing. That's still pretty strong in 1.0. In 1.1, I think they're trying to make it more in line. Chaos Bolts. This looks like a nerf. We have Chthonic Fissure. It looks like a nerf. Death Seal, minimum cost going from 1 to minimum being 0. For those of you who don't know, 0 mana cost you can cast while negative, 1 mana cost you can't. This is potentially a bigger buff than it sounds like. I don't know if negative mana is something you often have with Lich, but if it is, you can now cast Death Seal. Pretty cool. Dreadshade. Okay, cool. We have Ghost Flame. This looks like nerfs across the board. This is a huge nerf to the dodge. That's a 10 times nerf right here. This is really big. Yeah, Ghost Flame was pretty strong. Pretty strong though. So probably warranted. You now can regen mana while channeling. That might make it better, actually. Depending on your build, I'm not sure. But it could be interesting still. So we have some harvest stuff. We have Profane Veil. The Vampiric Pool, this is what people were using to abuse Ward. This is a nerf, pretty reasonable. We have some more nerfs here. Reaper Form. Not super familiar, so I won't try and give wrong opinions on these. I'll just skip them. We have Mage stuff, Disintegrate. There's a lot of stuff here. I'm not going to go over all this in this video. This deserves its own video, honestly. But in general, they're trying to make it viable, so expect some power increases, hopefully. And it would be nice to see some build stuff come out of this, some actual Disintegrate builds. I guess the TLDR is that the old Gambler's Fallacy Soul Gambler, stacking crit chance, converting it into damage, that was sort of a bug, I guess. They've fixed that, and then in change, they buffed the damage a bunch. I hope to see Disintegrate being cool. Elemental Nova, the same channeling treatment with mana regen. Infernal Nova, this is a nerf to Frostclaw, because Frostclaw triggered Elemental Nova, and you got to use a 250% AoE that had a cooldown added, and you would bypass the cooldown because it's a trigger. So indirectly, this is a nerf to Frostclaw. This was an expected change. We aren't really surprised by that. Fireball stuff, fewer points doing the same thing for unlocking subsequent points. This is a buff. Flammability also gives Lightning Shred. This is a buff. Firebrand. This looks like a buff. Flame Reave. Let's see, it looks like a buff. Flame Rush. This seems like a buff. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is a buff. Focus. Okay, this is interesting. So this right here is buff. This is something that I got nerfed, actually. Pretty happy about that. I did make a video recently and there was, I guess, a bug where you could just tap it and then never put it on cooldown and get an infinite amount of ward. They fixed that. Really happy they did because that was very abusive. Anyway, Frostclaw. This is a huge one. I know a lot of people are looking to hear about this one. So we have something about Ballista. I don't think many people actually use that. The mana cast, when you use a mana skill, you cast Frostclaw. This is a huge nerf to the Mana Strike Frostclaw build. This is one of the builds that I was using previously, and I was hoping to try again this cycle. So if you didn't know, it would be free if you triggered it through a melee skill, which meant that whatever Frostclaw's mana is, it doesn't actually matter because it's free. Now it has a cost. I think that was probably a bug before, but this makes sense. It's reasonable. It is a big nerf to that melee build, though. We have some mana cost reduction, so there's going to need to be some math done here. A bunch of mana cost reductions. We have 2 flat here, 2 flat here, 1 flat here. A bit of a multiplier reduction. So overall, this is going to reduce the cost quite a bit. Keep in mind, flat applies before multipliers, so the 5 mana reduction here, flat, ends up being more than 5 reduction after multipliers. So we'll have to see how big of a nerf this is to Frostclaw, but it definitely is because of this last point here. 12 mana on cast, only on direct cast. So if you didn't know, Frostclaw was 5 casts total per direct cast. So you gain the 12 mana on each of the 5 at something like 36% chance or something. So this is going to reduce the mana gain from that by about 80%. It's a very, very big nerf, but there are some other ways to gain mana now in 1.1. So I don't know, maybe Frostclaw might actually survive. We'll see. I think it's probably still going to be strong. I will be making videos on that, so stay tuned if you are interested in Frostclaw. We will see what this ends up being. Closed circuit no longer stacks. This was something people were using to get an insane amount of crit chance. You would bounce the lightning blast to enemies and then back to yourself, or to back and forth between enemies and yourself, and you get a huge amount of stacks. You get a bunch of lightning damage, a bunch of crit chance, easily get crit cap using this one node. They've now nerfed it. That is a pretty big nerf, but it does make sense. Mana Strike, we have knockback, converting Mana Strike to cold. This might enable some new builds, pretty cool stuff. We have a bug fix for Rune Bolt, pretty cool. Runic Invocation, Frostguard nerf, this is completely expected. No longer granting 30% DR, this is a massive nerf. Runemaster basically had permanent 30% DR, no longer has that. Ward granted, every point size now. So this is a buff, actually, the ward part of it. So going from a DR spammer, stat stick sort of skill, it is now a ward generator. +1 per int, that's not very much. I don't think Frostguard is S tier anymore. And we also had movement node fix, cool. And bug fix to the runic energy. Shatter Strike, what do we have? Is this a buff? 2 ward, doubled against frozen enemies from always 5. Is this actually a nerf? This seems like a nerf. Maybe. It's a bit mixed. This might be a bit of each, not exactly sure. Snap Freeze. A nerf to the freeze duration. You used to be able to stun lock. So you go, used to get 60% duration, 5 points of 12 nodes. Now you get 4 of 10. So 40% from 60% total. This is a huge nerf. Will make stun locking much, much harder. I don't think Snap Freeze alone will be able to stun lock anymore. But maybe combined with something else you might be able to. Static Orb. This is a pretty big nerf, actually. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't think Static Orb is particularly overpowered, but this is a nerf. What else do we have? Avalanche. There's a lot of stuff here. It's basically reworking the skill. Avalanche might end up being strong. The boulders, you get 10 small boulders, big boulder, and then an additional small boulder on crit, potentially 12 boulders. The total damage effectiveness, if you were able to hit everything on a boss, would be over 5,000%. The potential here is really, really high. I'm excited to see what this ends up being. This deserves its own video as well. I won't go into it too much. We have some Earthquake stuff, Fury Leap, Bug Fix, Gathering Storm, some repeat related stuff, Maelstrom, more damage, 3% increased dodge from, this might be a nerf, not exactly sure, Serpent Strike. I won't touch on this too much, there will be people better suited to go over this than I am. Then we have Rogue, Aerial Assault, what else? Umbral Blade hits from, oh, you don't inflict Shadow Daggers anymore. That feels like a pretty big nerf, I think. Definitely correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it feels like a nerf. You used to be able to just jump around with aerial assault and blow everything up, applying shadow daggers. I don't know if you still can. We have acid flask, ballista, say nerf, cinder strike. Looks like a buff. We have dancing strikes. We have detonating arrow. Okay, this is interesting. This was a huge meta skill. Bug fix. Applied multiple times if you hit multiple enemies. Okay. So this is a huge, huge nerf, bug fix, I should say, to detonating arrow. Applied to indirect cast, so you get a huge amount of stacks of shred and all that other stuff. That is now gone. This is, yeah, so this is rightfully buffed, or sorry, nerfed. Makes sense. We will see what this actually ends up being. What do we have? Dive bomb base damage are now significantly nerfed. This was very, very strong. People were one-shotting everything with this. And they now deal 60%, so you got multiple dive bomb hits per cast. That scaling is reduced a lot. This seems pretty warranted. Explosive trap, smoke traps. Okay. You used to be able to exceed maximum active track limit, high chance to trigger. Okay. Seems like nerfs. Falconry. Okay. Seem like reasonable nerfs across the board. Multi-shot. Is this a buff, maybe? Possibly buff. Cool. What else we have? Some more stuff. I will let somebody who mains Rogue go into this more detail. I'm probably not going to do it justice. So we have Sentinel stuff. There's a lot of bugs here for Racing Strike. That's pretty cool. Forge Strike. I'm hoping they get a buff. This is a very weak skill for at least hit-based. More physical damage without the flat. You do already get a lot of flat, so more multiplying is probably good. You get more global damage. Oh, this is a more multiplier previously increased. That's pretty big. What else? Armor shred stuff. Is this actually good now? Not clear. I don't know if this is enough. Healing hands. This was another huge one. Let's see. Prevents mana, so they gave it the channeling treatment. Base healing reduced. Okay, this is a huge nerf. 20% of healing converted from 100%. Used to be able to use this to generate an absurd amount of ward. That is a massive nerf to that. But makes sense. They were getting over 100,000 ward with this. Very, very overpowered. There's some bugs. Actually, a lot of bugs around that. Wow, okay. I guess we'll see if it is still viable. It seems like it might still be okay. Javelin, Judgment. Is this a buff? Maybe a buff. 1% more damage per 2 from 3% per 2. Oh, that seems pretty bad. What else? Shield Bash is another one that they're trying to make bring up to standards. We'll see how that turns out. Warpath, same channeling treatment. some sort of indirect buff here. Pretty cool. Passive changes. There's probably a lot of stuff to go over here. 4% more damage per curse on the target from 5. This is a nerf. Ward per 3 from ward per 2. This is a nerf. This is a nerf. It seems like nerfs to Warlock all around. And then I'm guessing this is going to be mostly buffs. Yeah, this is buffs to Spellblade. We get more spell damage, less cast speed penalty. Extra threshold node. Oh, flat crit per int? I don't think we saw this in the spoiler. This is pretty interesting, actually. There might be some stuff here you can do with that. So you get 12 ward when you hit at least one enemy. And then it was 4 per melee hit. Okay. So on groups you get less, and on single you get more. Makes sense. Using a melee attack, you gain... Okay. This is pretty good. Pretty good stuff. You should be able to get more ward with all this. More incentive to stack int, which is also ward retention. These seem like buffs to Spellblade. Pretty cool. I like it. And we have Rune Master. Arcane Focus now grants 2 ward from 4. Ooh, this is big. 6% reduced bonus damage taken from crits from 8. This is actually early in the Rune Master tree, so this could be considered a indirect nerf to all the classes. That's pretty painful. So how many points was it? I think it was 6 points. So it used to be 48% reduced. Now it'll be 36. Pretty big nerf. You probably just one exalted affix. You used to be able to just get one exalt on like a belt, like a T7, and you'd be capped. Now you probably need at least 2 affixes to cap. 2 ward per active from 4 is a big nerf to ward gen. Ward gain when you hit with a spell from 28. With a cooldown. Oh, it has a cooldown now. This is a big nerf. You used to be able to get like 30 hits per second times 28. This was the biggest ward generator that Rune Master had, at least for builds that hit a lot. Now it is better for builds that don't hit a lot and worse for builds that do. 2 ward on crit from 1. This is actually a... Oh, 5 times per second. Okay. They're trying to cap some of the abusive ward stuff here. Per 6 int from 1%. This is a big nerf to the cooldown. It's kind of painful. You now gain 8% multi per. This is a big nerf. Huge nerfs to Rune Master overall. So we gain 1% more spell... Wait, what? 1% more spell damage per 2 mana cost? Wow. Up to 50%. No wonder they're nerfing Static Orb. This makes sense. You get 50% more multiplier right there. Wow, this is actually a huge buff to Sorcerer. No longer gives 15 armor per point. I kind of liked that armor, to be honest. You now gain 2 ward per second per point. It's not nothing, at least early game. Threshold bonus 1 ward per second per 10 max mana. That's a lot. That's actually really good. 1 ward gain per when you use a skill that costs less 40. Oh, that's a nerf. Yeah, that's a nerf. Okay. I guess understandable considering all the other mana stuff. Now grants 50% usage per from 3. This is a buff to mana regen. I like it. 15 chill. Okay. Always freezes 8 enemy. Okay. 1% more. So this is a more multiplier to lightning now and a threshold. This is huge. This will result in some new builds guaranteed. So anything that hits a lot and costs at least 40 mana, it seems like you will be able to get a lot of spark charges. Archmage, 1% per point, no longer tripled. So this is really cool. You can have a mana refund. There will be cool stuff that you can do with this. I like it. I think Sorcerer might end up being possibly better than Rune Master this patch. It's pretty cool stuff. A lot of changes here, a lot of buffs to Sorcerer. Mana regen, a lot of mana regen stuff. 3% increased mana. This is really good. This increases your mana, not flat mana. There's not a lot of sources of that. That's very good. 50% mana spent gained as ward as a free threshold is also good. Primalist, not much here, actually. Beastmaster, I'm guessing this is buff. Then we have Shaman. Seems like buffs to Shaman. I don't know a whole lot about this stuff, so I will leave that to somebody else. We're already getting pretty long here. Blade Dancer, let's try and move through this. 50% more Shadow Dagger damage to boss run. That's actually a buff. That's pretty cool. I like it. I wasn't expecting Shadow Dagger buffs. And we have Marksman. More damage. They're trying to add more damage multipliers into the passive trees, which is pretty cool. From 15% increase. It seems like they're going for Marksman buffs. Some of you might find that weird with the detonating arrow, but they are nerfing that. So in turn, Marksman as a class probably does need some love. This makes sense. We have a bunch of Forge Guard stuff. I'm hoping that these are buffs. Give me some more multipliers, please. Okay, 10%. You need fewer hits to get your armor. Stun avoid. More damage. Per mana cost. You can scale mana cost into damage. Okay. This is the new one that they teased. You get crit multi. This is not a crit multi, like a more crit multiplier thing. It's additive with your other crit multiplier. So I know some people are thinking you can like double your crit multi. This is not the case. We have reduced bonus damage taken from crit strikes. Nice, I like it. Void Knight. 1% more melee damage per 3. Oh, this is the match through bonus, okay. That is interesting. You have your vitality scaling stuff. Potentially a lot of damage. 2 health per vitality. Cool. Vitality scaling. Item changes. Some quality of life stuff. Added health regen, amulets instead of boots. Can no longer roll on boots. Dodge rating while evading and increased dodges. Oh, this is a new one. Okay. Increased dodge suffix can no longer roll on boots. Bug fix. Increase instead of added void resist. Fixed a bug where armor shred effect instead of duration. Melee attack speed. Boot changes. We have more move speed. Except this one that gives you evade stuff. Makes sense. This is less move speed. Seems like a weird nerf. Shrine boots. Cooldown recovery speed for evade. So they're adding some evade stuff. Prophecy now grants an actual useful boot, I think. So that's good. Unique boot, Rain Dance. Buff. And a buff, cool. Dodge rating while using evade. That's a lot of flat dodge, but your evade duration is pretty short. Not sure how useful, and this was just general evade. I don't know. So we have buffs to flat mana cost reduction. This is really cool. This will be interesting because it will apply to the uniques that use these base types. Really good stuff here. So potentially you can get a lot more minus mana. Staff implicit, same treatment here. So you can get up to -5. There's some incentive to use some of the higher level ones here. Crystal Wand, if you're stacking mana, I believe that's the mana wand. You can get that plus -5, really cool. Armor affix, this is a nerf. I feel like nerf is not really necessary. Oh wait, it's a buff. I'm crazy. It's a buff. Health gained on block. This is a big buff. Big buff here. Block change. This is a buff. Block effectiveness. This is a buff. Dodge rating. This is a buff. Added health. Buff. Added mana. Buff. Flat melee. from this is a buff. Makes sense. They are trying to bring melee up to par, so buffs here, pretty reasonable. Stun Void, it's a buff. Spell damage, I like this. This is a buff. It's a tiny buff, but it's a buff. Chance to bleed. This is a buff. Health regen, buff. Armor, buff. Dodge rating, buff. Affixes across the board, buff. Mana regen, buff. Melee damage, this is a buff. Attribute. Oh, watch this be a nerf, please. Oh no, it's not a nerf. I was expecting a nerf. T7 is 14 to 16 from 13. I really, really like this. This doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you're trying to go for perfect gear and you're re-rolling your affixes, this is actually a huge deal. It makes getting the perfect roll much easier. I love this. Reflect, this is a buff. Thorns, this is a buff. Endurance, buff. This is good. I like this with health builds possibly being more meta. This is a much needed buff. Bow damage, this is a buff. Health and stun avoid, this is a buff. Buff for dodge. Oh, experimental. It's a buff. Mana and mana regen. This can't roll on scepters, really. Why? I guess they want wands to be the mana item. That feels like a kind of a strange change. Mana regen. This is a nerf? Percent increased, really? This is a nerf. Okay. The volatile zombies. This is a big nerf. For your Queen of the Jungle, spamming potions, getting a bunch of zombies is a nerf. Experimental mana on potion use. This is a buff. We have a nerf for freeze rate per stack and show. Cooldown recovery. This is a nerf. Potions, this is a buff. Bow crit and attack speed. It's a nerf. Unique items, 30 new uniques. We just have the names here, so this, I guess we'll see. Effective level for LP. Hey, it's a buff to Bastion. This is a good change. Buff to Boulders, make it more easy to get LP. Good. Buff to Bloodkeeper. It's a nerf. I don't know why this is a nerf. No longer has more damage. Cleaver, this is a nerf. I think this is understandable. Cleaver got off pretty easily considering how strong it is. Didn't need a more multiplier. Cradle, this looks like a buff. Bloody Nib, it's a buff to LP. So there's a bunch of LP stuff. Is there anything interesting here? For 2%. This big nerf to Frostbite, this was kind of overperforming, understandable. Immolators, 2 spell for fire and necrotic, up to 20. From 4 to 6 up to 40. So it used to go up to 240 flat. Now it goes up to 40 flat. That's a huge nerf, but now you can actually use it with the conversion changes. I'm a little bit disappointed, but I understand. Now grants melee for directly used. Oh, okay, this is a trap nerf. People are using it with the trap and getting all the buff. They changed this to 15 to 20. The thresholds are probably going to often be at 25. I guess you wouldn't execute at 25. I think Mike said that would not be the case anyway, but this is a nerf. People were doing the swap into last laugh to execute a boss. It's probably still worth doing for really tanky bosses, but this is a nerf. What else we have? Assyrian. Less damage taken, cool. Plague Bearer, Sacrificial. Is there any big items here? Snowdrift, Cold Pen. They fixed the bug on the Kestrel. I like this as a leveling item. That was really annoying. They changed the LP. This was way too low of an LP level for how strong this is. Wings of Argentus. An actual buff to the LP level. That's pretty cool. This used to be the highest in the game. Now it is not. This is, I'm expecting a nerf. This was very strong. Time locks enemies within 4 meters from 8. Okay, this buffed the AoE of the stun. Now only time locks non-boss enemies. Bosses are instead slowed. Okay. There was a stun lock tech with this that is now gone. Makes sense. This is a huge nerf. Wow, that's a really big nerf to wrong warp. Bug fix. Okay, it was giving damage to everything. So nerf to wrong warp. Enemy balance. It looks like seeing a lot of less damage here. Attack range reduced, deals less damage. A lot of some of the overperforming. Do they have smoldering Lithrax on the list? That was actually insane. I don't think so. I didn't see it. We'll continue. MTX cosmetics. I'll skip over. It's pretty cool. New stuff here. Visual and sound. We have bug fixes, level design. This is already a crazy long video. Enemies, dungeons, visuals, and yeah, that's it. I'll wrap it up now. Catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.